Millionaire CEO tied girls' shoelaces after kids laughed at her, then learned who she really was. Marcus Thompson adjusted his Italian leather shoes as he stepped out of his black Tesla onto the sidewalk. The 42-year-old CEO of Thompson Industries had just closed a $50 million deal, but something felt hollow inside him as he walked toward the small cafe where he decided to grab his usual afternoon coffee. The weight of success had become a burden he carried alone, surrounded by people who only saw his bank account, never the man behind it. That's when he heard it, the cruel laughter of children echoing from the small park across the street. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and don't forget to comment below what you think about Marcus's choice. Also, make sure to subscribe to Trillionaire in Love for more inspiring stories that will change how you see the world. Marcus had always been sensitive to the sound of mockery. Growing up in foster care, he knew intimately how it felt to be the target of other children's cruelty. His hand instinctively moved toward his phone to call his assistant to handle whatever charity donation might fix this situation from a distance, but something made him stop. Instead, he found himself walking across the street toward the commotion. In the center of a small group of laughing children sat a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her clothes, while clean, were clearly second-hand. She was struggling with her shoelaces, her small fingers fumbling as tears started to well up in her brown eyes. The other children, all dressed in expensive sneakers and designer clothes, pointed and giggled. "She doesn't even know how to tie her shoes," one boy called out, his voice dripping with the kind of casual cruelty that only children could deliver so effortlessly. "Maybe she's too poor to have real shoes," another added, causing a fresh wave of laughter. Marcus felt his chest tighten. The little girl's face was turning red, not from embarrassment, but from the effort of trying not to cry in front of her tormentors. She kept working at the laces, her determination both heartbreaking and admirable. Without thinking, Marcus found himself kneeling down beside her on the grass, his expensive suit getting dirty on the damp ground. The laughter stopped abruptly as the children noticed this well-dressed stranger joining their circle. "Having trouble with those laces?" Marcus asked gently, his voice carrying the same tone he wished someone had used with him when he was her age. The little girl looked up at him with those tear-filled eyes, and Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. She nodded silently, her lower lip trembling. "That's okay," he said, reaching for her small foot. "These kinds of laces can be tricky. Mind if I help?" She shook her head, and Marcus carefully took her worn sneaker in his hands. As he began working on the laces, he spoke softly to her. "You know, I didn't learn to tie my shoes until I was 8, he lied smoothly, wanting to ease her embarrassment. "My foster mom finally had to sit with me for 3 whole hours before I got it right." The little girl's eyes widened slightly. "Really?" "Really," Marcus confirmed, finishing the first shoe and moving to the second. "Sometimes we all need a little help with things. There's no shame in that." The group of children had grown quiet, watching this unexpected scene unfold. Marcus could feel their confusion and curiosity as he worked on the second shoe with the same careful attention he brought to million-dollar contracts. "There we go," he said, standing up and brushing off his knees. "Perfect fit." The little girl stood up and took a few experimental steps, a small smile finally breaking across her face. "Thank you, mister." "You're very welcome," Marcus replied. He turned to look at the other children, his expression becoming more serious. "You know, there are a lot of different ways to be rich in this world. Some people have money, some people have kindness, and some people have courage. This young lady here has been showing more courage in the last 5 minutes than most adults show in a lifetime." The children shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that their behavior hadn't been as funny as they'd thought. Marcus was about to leave when the little girl tugged on his jacket. "Mister, are you okay? You look sad." The question caught him completely off guard. In all his years of success, through countless business meetings and social events, no one had ever asked him if he was okay. No one had ever looked past the expensive clothes and the confident exterior to see the loneliness underneath. Marcus started, then stopped. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that despite having everything money could buy, he felt emptier than ever? That he'd built walls so high around himself that no one could reach him anymore? Sometimes grown-ups get sad too, he finally said. Just like kids do. The little girl nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her. My mama says that when people are mean to other people, it's usually because they're sad inside. Maybe those kids are just sad. Marcus looked at the group of children who were now walking away, their earlier bravado completely deflated. The little girl's wisdom struck him like a bolt of lightning. When had he stopped seeing people's pain and started only seeing their actions? "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Emma," she replied. "What's yours?" "Marcus." "It's very nice to meet you, Emma. Do you want to sit with me for a while? Sometimes when I'm sad, I like to watch the clouds and try to find shapes in them." Marcus glanced at his watch. He had 3 more meetings scheduled, a conference call with investors in Tokyo, and a dinner with potential clients. His entire life was scheduled down to the minute, every moment accounted for and optimized for maximum profit. But looking down at Emma's hopeful face, he made a decision that would have shocked everyone who knew him. "I'd like that very much," he said. They sat together on the park bench, Marcus's expensive suit a stark contrast to Emma's simple clothes, but somehow it didn't matter. For the next hour, they watched clouds and talked about everything and nothing. Emma told him about her mom, who worked 2 jobs to take care of them, and how she was learning to read big words. Marcus found himself talking about things he'd never shared with anyone, about growing up without parents, about how success had become both his greatest achievement and his greatest prison. "You know what I think?" Emma said, swinging her legs from the bench. "I think maybe you forgot how to be happy because you've been working so hard to make sure you never feel sad again." The 7-year-old had just delivered the most profound therapy session of his life, and she didn't even know it. When it was time to leave, Marcus felt reluctant to end this unexpected friendship. "Emma, would it be okay if I came back to visit you sometime?" "Really? You'd want to do that?" "I would. Very much." Emma grinned and threw her small arms around his waist in a tight hug. Marcus, who hadn't been hugged in years, felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "Thank you for helping me with my shoes," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me with something much more important," he whispered back. As Marcus walked back to his car, he felt different. Lighter somehow. The hollow feeling in his chest had been filled with something warm and genuine. He'd spent years building an empire, but in one afternoon, a 7-year-old girl had shown him what he'd been missing. But the story was far from over. The next week, Marcus returned to the park at the same time, hoping to see Emma again. Instead, he found a small memorial of flowers and cards where they'd sat on the bench. A woman in her 30s, with the same dark hair and brown eyes as Emma, was kneeling beside them, arranging fresh daisies. Marcus's heart stopped. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked up, and Marcus saw Emma's gentle spirit reflected in her mother's face. "You must be Marcus," she said softly. "Emma told me all about you. About how you helped her with her shoes and sat with her in the park." "Where is she?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Emma had leukemia," her mother, Sarah, explained. "She'd been fighting it for 2 years. She passed away 3 days ago." The world seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. The little girl who had shown him such wisdom, such kindness, had been carrying the weight of a terminal illness, and she'd spent her time comforting him. "She talked about you every day after you met," Sarah continued. "She said she met an angel who needed help remembering how to smile. She made me promise to find you if anything happened to her." Through his tears, Marcus listened as Sarah told him about Emma's final days. How she'd insisted on donating her few toys to other sick children. How she'd made cards for all the nurses who had taken care of her. How she'd spent her last week trying to raise money for other families dealing with childhood cancer. "She wanted me to give you this," Sarah said, handing him a small, hand-drawn card. On the front was a picture of two people sitting on a bench, looking up at cloud-shaped hearts. Inside, in Emma's careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being my friend. Don't forget to look for the good stuff. Love, Emma." Marcus broke down completely. This little girl, who had so little time left, had spent her final week thinking about others. She had faced the ultimate challenge, her own mortality, with more grace and wisdom than he'd ever shown in facing the simple challenge of loneliness. But Emma had left him with more than just a lesson. She'd left him with a purpose. Within a month, Marcus had established the Emma Foundation, dedicating half of his personal fortune to supporting families dealing with childhood cancer. But more than that, he changed how he lived his life. He started volunteering at children's hospitals, not as a wealthy donor making appearances, but as someone who sat on floors and tied shoelaces and listened to young voices full of wisdom. He learned that the children he met weren't looking for his money, they were looking for the same thing Emma had given him, genuine human connection. They taught him that courage wasn't about building business empires or accumulating wealth. Courage was about showing up, being vulnerable, and choosing kindness even when the world seemed dark. Marcus started a program where successful business leaders would spend time with children in hospitals, not to give speeches or write checks, but to simply be present. To play games, to listen to stories, to remember what really mattered. The program grew rapidly as other executives discovered what Marcus had learned, that success without connection was just expensive loneliness. The park where he'd met Emma became a regular stop in his routine. Every week, he'd sit on their bench and watch the clouds, remembering the little girl who had taught him that the richest people weren't those who had the most money, but those who gave the most of themselves. 1 year later, Marcus returned to the park for the anniversary of their meeting. He found Sarah there, as he'd hoped he would. "She would have been 8 today," Sarah said softly. "Happy birthday, Emma," Marcus whispered to the sky. Sarah smiled through her tears. "You know, she always said she wasn't sad about being sick because she knew she was here to help people remember how to love each other. I think she succeeded with you." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. In his pocket was a letter from the latest family helped by the Emma Foundation, a single mother whose son was now in remission, who wrote to thank him not for the financial support, but for the volunteers who had sat with her during the long nights in the hospital. People who had learned, as he had, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up and tie someone's shoelaces when they need help. The millionaire CEO who had once measured his worth in dollars and deals now measured it in moments of connection, in shoelaces tied, in tears shared, and in the knowledge that every act of kindness rippled outward in ways he could never fully measure. Emma had faced the greatest challenge of all, a shortened life, by choosing to fill her limited time with unlimited love. She'd taught him that real wealth wasn't about what you accumulated, but about what you gave away. Not just money, but time, attention, kindness, and presence. As Marcus sat on the bench watching the clouds form shapes in the sky, he whispered a promise to the little girl who had changed his life, "I won't forget to look for the good stuff, Emma. I promise." The greatest fortune he'd ever earned wasn't in his bank account, it was in his heart, where a 7-year-old girl had taught him that the most successful life was one spent in service to others, one shoelace at a time. If Emma's story has moved you the way it moved Marcus, please take a moment to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of simple kindness. Leave a comment below telling us about a time someone showed you unexpected compassion, or about someone you'd like to honor with an act of kindness. Hit that like button if you believe that small acts of love can change the world, and don't forget to subscribe to Trillionaire in Love for more stories that remind us what it truly means to be rich in the things that matter most. Because sometimes the smallest people teach us the biggest lessons about life, love, and what it really means to be successful.